While the location of the 57 Plymouth on November 22nd, 1963 is the most important question, it's also interesting that when the FBI visits Mrs. Mather to interview her on December 14th, 1963, they say the Plymouth is in the driveway. So this is the car that has the license plate that was seen on the Ford driven by Oswald. When they interview her, they say that car is in the driveway. This implies that that's her car and that the husband takes the 54 Ford station wagon to work. At least on the day the FBI came by, apparently that was the case. But in 1977 or 1978, she has a different story. She says, according to the HSCA investigator, she pointed out her tags on the old Ford station wagon and advised Carl had the 57 Plymouth at work. So this is referring to when the FBI interviewed her on December 14th, 1963. So what she's saying is that the 57 Plymouth was with Carl at work, but the FBI said that the 57 Plymouth was in the driveway. So she could be not remembering correctly 15 years later, but it looks to me like maybe they're trying to shape the story here. She doesn't get quoted here by the HSCA either. The HSCA interviews are interesting in that I can't find them all. Sometimes I can just find summaries, and with the Mathers, all I can find is summaries. So they're not quoting her. But anyway, the story is different now, 15 years later. And I think it may be intentional, because this is the issue. Where was the Plymouth? If the Plymouth was with Carl Mather, then it's different. Then he must have driven it from Collins Radio to get home. So it's important who has which car. But judging by the earlier evidence, which I think is more likely to be correct, she's the one that drove the 57 Plymouth while her husband drove the 54 Ford. But the story changed. Now, what seems completely obvious to me is that somebody who had possession of the blue Plymouth took the license plate off that car and put it on the red Ford and used it in Oak Cliff, and apparently Oswald was driving that car. To me, that is the obvious implication of all this evidence, and yet, apparently, to judge by the documents, none of the investigators ever conceived of this being a possibility. No attempt, apparently, was ever made to find out where the blue Plymouth was. They didn't ask. I mean, she could have lent it out to somebody. The Mathers could have let somebody borrow it, and we wouldn't know because nobody asked. See, what this means is the FBI knows the answers, and they don't want those answers on the record. And I can't say exactly who did what here, but it seems obvious to me that somebody had possession of Mather's Plymouth, took the plate off it, and put it on a red Ford, and they used the red Ford. And the FBI just has no clue. It's like it didn't even occur to these people that that could have happened. And of course, that's ridiculous. They're professional investigators. Now, apparently, no official talked to Carl Mather until 1978, when the HSCA apparently interviewed him, and at least they made summaries of the interviews. And I'll read from some of that here. This is from an interview with Carl Mather. What seemed like 6 weeks later, and this is 6 weeks after his wife had been interviewed by the FBI, what seemed like 6 weeks later, a second agent came to the same house and interviewed Barbara, again at home alone during the day. And he, too, was interested in the fact that a tag listed to Carl was observed on a different type of vehicle in a different part of town. When she indicated the first agent didn't understand it either, he seemed surprised another agent had been ahead of him. This seemed to cause his interest in the matter to wane. Like the first agent, he didn't return, nor did he interview Carl. So I think this shows that the FBI wasn't trying very hard, and then continuing on, what I think is a very important paragraph. Not that Carl isn't used to being interviewed by government agents. He has a security clearance, and he has since he had started traveling with his company. He's been with them for 21 years now. He has traveled overseas. His specific function deals with the installation of special electronic gear in aircraft. One such assignment caused him to be quartered in Brandywine, Maryland, as he worked for some period of time at Andrews Air Force Base, working on Air Force Two, Vice President Johnson's plane at the time. So Carl Mather works for defense contractor Collins Radio. Carl Mather has worked on Lyndon Johnson's airplane prior to the assassination. Carl Mather, J.D. Tippett's old friend, with security clearance, working on the vice president's plane. The license plate from one of his cars was seen down the street from the Tippit murder, driven by Oswald. And apparently officialdom does not find this interesting. And finally, in 1978, Carl Mather is asked where he was at the time, and he adds he does recall the date of 11/22/63. He worked all day at the Richardson, Texas Collins radio shop. Although the then boss, J.A. Pickford, has since retired, he thinks he's still in the area. Now, this isn't the story, actually. He didn't work all day, according to the older information. He left work at 2 to 2:30, presumably when he heard that Tippit had been shot, though. Well, I suppose he might have heard that on the radio by 2 o'clock. So, according to the old information, he didn't work all day, and yet apparently he told the HSCA that he did. That could be a simple error, but I think what this means, given that Carl Mather is this, he's an insider so far as his security clearance is concerned. He's trusted enough to work on Lyndon Johnson's airplane, and his license plate is on a car driven by Lee Harvey Oswald near the Tippit murder scene. I think it has to mean that Carl Mather was at least peripherally involved in whatever was happening prior to the assassination, whether you want to call it an assassination plot. He probably didn't know that's what it was, but probably he knew somebody was using his car, and whoever it was using it as part of the assassination plot. And but I can't say any more than that. How would I know? And the HSCA did track down Mather's old boss, James A. Pickford, who was no longer working for Collins Radio, and he didn't remember whether Mather was there that day or not. And he suggested, Pickford says he retired from Collins Radio in 1972 and has become associated with another firm. He says he suggested contacting Collins personnel, but doubts if records from 1963 would still be available. And apparently they didn't bother doing that because apparently nothing else is available anyway to the public to say what Collins Radio personnel said. So actually we don't have any confirmation that Carl Mather was at work that day. It's just his word. Maybe Carl Mather wasn't at work on the day of the assassination. But apparently that can't be known for sure. And there is another story of a red Ford appearing in the evidence of the Tippit murder, or whatever happened on 10th Street. And it comes from Domingo Benavides during his Warren Commission testimony. He mentioned this as an afterthought when they asked him if there was anything else he would like to say. He mentioned that there had been a red car at the scene of the Tippit murder. And this HSCA document refers to the Benavides testimony. After giving further details of the shooting of the officer and the flight of the man, Benavides said in his testimony that a car which he believed to be a red Ford was parked in front of him on 10th Street. He described the driver of the red car as about 25 or 30 years old. Benavides said the man pulled over in his car when he heard the scare but did not get out of the car. He was located about 6 cars from the police car. The committee did not locate any public documents or Warren Commission reports which identified the driver of the red car. However, through investigation in Dallas, the committee did locate and interview a man who said he was at the scene of the Tippit shooting but never came forward with information. Committee investigators interviewed Jack Ray Tatum at his office at the Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas on February 1st, 1978. Tatum stated that on the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963, he was driving north on Denver Street and stopped at 10th Street. At that point, he saw a police squad car and a young white male walking on the sidewalk near the squad car. Both the police car and the young man were heading east on 10th Street. As Tatum approached the squad car, he saw the young man leaning over the passenger side of the police car with both hands in his zippered jacket. Tatum said that as he drove through the intersection of 10th and Patton Streets, he heard 3 shots in rapid succession. Tatum said he went through the intersection, stopped his car, and turned to look back. At that point, he saw the police officer lying on the ground near the front of the police car with a young male standing near him. Tatum said the man ran toward the back of the police car with his gun in his hand. The man then stepped back into the street and shot the police officer as he was lying on the ground. Now, it seems to me the way the HSCA has written this document that they are implying that Jack Tatum was driving a red Ford and that that's the car Benavides saw. This is not stated in any of the HSCA documents, however. We don't know what kind of car Jack Tatum was driving. Maybe he told Dale Myers that later. Maybe he's supposed to be the red Ford driver. But if he really was, I think it would be stated explicitly in this document that Tatum was driving a red Ford, and it's not. So that's one problem with identifying Tatum here. I think this is dishonest. I think they're implying this was Tatum, but they know it's not a red Ford because that would be the obvious question they would ask, and apparently they didn't have that information. And another problem with Tatum is he describes a sequence of shooting that no other witness described. As everybody else said, it was 3 or 4 quick shots. One, I think, what's his name? Warren Reynolds, who didn't see the shooting, I think he heard a separation of sound, 1 shot and then a following bunch of shots, I think he said. But he didn't give the time interval between them. I think the Davis girls also described a shot that was separated. But you got people who are watching the scene. You got Helen Markham and Scoggins and Benavides. And the headshot, the coup de grace shot that's celebrated by Dale Myers, never happened according to these witnesses. But Jack Tatum says it did. So I think Jack Tatum is a fake witness who was brought forward to explain the shots on Tippit, which if you look at them, he's got 3 to the chest and 1 to the head. That sounds kind of odd for the way the official witnesses described it. So the way Tatum describes it makes more sense, but apparently it's not true because none of the other witnesses saw that. And I think he's a red herring witness. He just brought forward to confuse or to make us not wonder whether Lee Harvey Oswald was driving that red Ford seen by the mechanic T.F. White. And if you're watching on YouTube, this is the end of part 2.